Here with another COVID file. Again, I am under quarantine after a positive COVID test, so I thought I would take advantage of some of the time to do a little archiving of sorts, going over some of my old characters and talking about some of the stories and things I remember about them. In the last one, I talked about Lakham Chobash, who was my chaotic Jedi and a very memorable character in my pantheon of Star Wars characters. I didn't make lots and lots and lots of Star Wars characters because I ran a lot of the games. So just like in some of my favorite games, I have few characters that I ever actually got a chance to play. Star Wars is middle ground there. Played quite a bit, ran a fair amount. Actually, I'd probably say I played more than I ran for Star Wars. Not for lack of trying, it just kind of worked out that way. The Star Wars role-playing game has never been my go-to game, the one that I wish to do more than any other. Although the urge is rapidly building up now that my best friend Vince is back. He and I played Star Wars more than any other role-playing game besides Dungeons & Dragons together. So, and this is another one of those characters that we played. I last talked about Lakham Chobash. Also in that campaign, I also played this character. And this, again, a well-loved old sheet using that same style, a custom sheet that we used for Lakham. But this... Raleigh Sincere. Sincere is in S-I-N-S-E-A-R. Also known as Tombstone. He was an outlaw. And an outlaw, in this particular sense, was somebody who the Empire had wronged so badly that even if they were a fairly normal person, something inside them broke. They are now driven to get revenge. Whether that's on a person, whether it's on the Empire as a whole, it doesn't really matter. Tombstone, his family was killed. Wife, child. The Empire sent him a form letter apologizing, and he just went off. An outlaw is given a certain amount of, some pretty impressive advantages to start out their career with. They start out with a very high dexterity. 4D dexterity means you're right there. Some of your best combat abilities, blaster and dodge, are going to start out pretty high. Mid-range knowledge, a little bit low on the mechanical side for a hero. Average technical, a little bit above average strength, and I think I upped the perception up to 3D. I think they start out below. But I did boost a couple of his attributes, so that helped. A couple of things about the character, though. He was one of the fastest characters I've ever had to get a dark side point, and he got 2 right away. He met the group when they were doing an adventure that the Rebellion wanted to capture a derelict Star Destroyer. The big ships? Right. They found one that was derelict, and they were like, hey, if we could fix this, and we could add it to our fleet, suddenly we have something that can hold its ground against some of the bigger Imperial ships. Obviously, the Empire has more, but anything you can use to take away from their fleet and add to yours is a big plus. I question the logistics. There's a huge investment of personnel that are involved in running a ship of that size, which the Empire can do, but the Rebellion would have a real hard time. I suspect it was largely a symbolic thing. To say, yeah, we're in this game too. So, Tombstone was discovered on this ship by the group. So this was not my very first character in this game. Lakham was the first character I made for this group. I think I just got tired of the insanity of Lakham, quite honestly. So when I switched to Raleigh, he started out combat ready. He also started with a heavy blaster pistol. which is a not insignificant weapon. They're pretty powerful, and usually only at close ranges, but most of your fights in Star Wars are relatively close range, as in many role-playing games, so no problems there. So they discovered him. He was a prisoner on this ship as an outlaw. They freed him, and there were a bunch of non-combatant Imperials that were still on the ship trying to keep it going and trying to keep the life support and stuff going and maybe fix it. Well, all the military complement, the stormtroopers, the Imperial Navy, they were dead or had evacuated. So the group is like, okay, well, we want to take control of the Star Destroyer, so we're going to go out into various important areas and take those. But we've got all these prisoners. Hey, you were their prisoner. What do you say about watching them for us? Sure, I can do that. All right, great. Everybody went off. So I told them, I'm like, hey, there's some 3,000 or 4,000 Imperials on this ship. There isn't enough brig space to put them all. Let's just put them into an airlock, into one of the shuttle bays. It's big enough to hold them. They can take blasts. Even if they come up with a weapon, they can't break their way out. It's relatively straightforward and already set up for security. So they all thought it was a great idea. So as soon as they left, he got on the intercom and said, all of you, for whatever reasons, have worked with the Empire. That makes you complicit with their crimes. Considering the rampant murder and other horrible things the Empire has done, that weight falls upon each of you equally. And happily, I'm in a position where I can act as the judge and the jury. And as the punishment is death, the executioner. Turned off the force field that exposed that bay to vacuum. They all got sucked out and died. That was a cold-blooded murder of, over 3,000 Imperials. 2 dark side points right off the bat. And I don't know. This is the last character sheet I had for that, so I wonder how many how many dark side points he ended up with. Only 1. I must have worked one of them off. So yeah. So anyhow, the thing about him, again, I played him as obsessively driven. If we weren't actively moving to fight Imperials, he was pretty despondent and, dare I say, a bit bitchy. And his combat doctrine was a little ridiculous. I'm surprised he didn't die, quite honestly. He never dodged. It was not in his forte. He would, literally, from the very get-go, he was pretty good with his blaster pistol. I think he started out with a 6D blaster. Yeah. Later raised, but he started out with 6 dice. And this was his entire combat doctrine. He would walk towards an opponent. He would have his blaster pistol out, and he would be shooting headshots exclusively. Only headshots. Which could be done. It was a more difficult shot. It would raise the difficulty. Which means that, occasionally I would miss. And an opponent who otherwise would have been hit might have been spared. But it knocked one off of the one die that the target would roll for resisting damage. So there's a much better chance that the damage would stick, and even if it didn't kill him in one shot, it might injure or stun them. So that's what he would do, is he would advance and nothing but headshots. And in his right hand, because he was left-handed, he'd hold a thermal detonator. Now, thermal detonators, from all the descriptions I've heard, they're a mining tool. They're a set explosive used to create a blast that would vaporize rock for use in mining, general demolitions. It's not a weapon. Proof of that is the fact that the blast radius is bigger than the throwing distance you can get with one. So if you're going to throw one, you're going to get caught in the blast unless you've got something special going on, like throwing it around a corner maybe, and even that. So they're devastating. At center distance, they do enough damage that it can basically kill just about anyone and would extremely injure even the most hardy and well-armored people. And he would have one of these heavy explosives in his hand. And he had it rigged so that it was on a 20-second countdown timer. So he would turn the countdown so that it's facing outward, so people can see it counting down and could hear it making this whining sound. And he would just walk forward coolly, taking headshots. No dodges. Headshot, headshot. And he would just keep holding this detonator with a very clear implication that if you shot him dead, he wouldn't be able to shut this detonator off and you were going to die too. And every time it would get down to 5 seconds, he would quickly stop it, reset it for 20 seconds, start, keep walking. When he got a little bit better, when he spent a force point, he would just fire more shots. He would not dodge. I did have to use a few character points, because this is second edition, to survive some of this aggressive posturing, but it was his combat doctrine, and it worked quite well. He survived through to the end of the campaign. I don't believe he ever died. And he was also involved in some of the more entertaining things that we had done. At one point, though, one of the things I remember was we were fighting, and at one point there were some Imperial scientists. We were in a research station. And one of these non-combatants, who again my character was not going to excuse, but he got close enough to be in hand-to-hand range, but he wasn't going to fight. So my character had to deprioritize him as a target to be shot. By this point, we were wearing exoskeletons. They basically increased strength used for lifting heavy objects in this station. They really didn't provide a great deal of armor, but we wore them so that we could blend in as laborers to, do things for the scientists so that people wouldn't suspect us as much. So my character's like, well, I don't want to waste the shot on him. So with my character's pretty solid strength, boosted by the exoskeleton, I'm like, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to grab him. And I made a roll. He really didn't dodge, but took the gauntleted hand, reached out, and grabbed him by the throat and picked him up. DM's like, okay, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to make a fist. Huh? Yeah, think about it. I've got his throat in my hand. If I make a fist, you can imagine what's going to happen to this guy. And everyone kind of got this queasy look on their face. And I looked at them and I said, do you not think this is something Tombstone would do? He's an Imperial scientist. And they're like, yeah, that's something he'd do. And I just kept holding the body up and using it as a shield as I kept shooting. So, that probably should have earned him a dark side point too, to be completely honest. But by this point, they were kind of already inured somewhat to his unorthodox tactics. So the other thing that I want to make sure people remember and relate to Tombstone is he was a part of one of the most esoteric rebellion missions I've ever been a part of. We were impersonating a band. We got to name the band. We got to learn how to play instruments. And I honestly can only remember that it was to get close to a System Moff, one of the governors of the Imperial branch who was watching over this particular a system in particular that was particularly contemptuous, but he was a Sector Moff. And we had to get close to him, so we were posing as a band. But we didn't have to be a band that really was cuddly to the Empire, because this was in a place that was kind of neutral ground, and this Moff was here to make sure no big trouble came out. So our group was dubbed Hammerhead's Half-Brother, and it was interesting because this adventure was written by the musician of the group, a person who I have an incredible amount of respect for. One of my very first friends that I made in college. His name's Mick. He's a great guy. Very much appreciate him. Not as much as I should, but he's really a great guy. And back then, he was in a band, and so this was a music-themed adventure for all of our hardened rebellion agents. So all the different characters had to learn Star Wars musical instruments. My character learned... I know I picked up a skill for that. The Miano. Yes, he learned the Miano. Got to 4D skill with it. Not terrible. If I remember right, it was that large, broad keyboard instrument that you see Plo Koon... No, not Plo Koon. Max Rebo playing in the Jabba the Hutt throne room scene. I could be wrong, but it's something that's basically based on keyboard. And we had people who learned the different weapons. The Wookiee did the percussion. Not too hard to understand. Drums are drums are drums. But one of our characters played the Jizz Whaler, which is a name so funny. But it's Star Wars. It's in Star Wars, and he got pretty good with it. So if you ever wanted him to play Jizz, he could do that. We were college students. It was hilarious at the time because the player himself was the smoothest of the lot of us. But that's what he got. So we made the band Hammerhead's Half-Brother. And anybody who was in that campaign will remember this one fondly. We even went through to the point of making songs for it. And we didn't have to be, again, all that subtle with these songs. So some of the more notorious ones were Emperor's Whipping Boy, which was about Darth Vader. God, I can't remember all of them. I actually wrote out an entire song called Scarred. And it was a story basically calling out the Empire for murdering, just terrible people. Because I write songs from time to time. It wasn't a parody. It was an original song. So yeah, it was a really interesting mission because there's my character who is deadened, absolutely obsessed with killing Imperials, and I had to actually not kill Imperials for a while we were posing as a band. That was hard for him, and it made for some pretty tense play because they could never be sure: is he just going to snap and murder somebody with a drumstick? They're not sure. But I didn't, and we succeeded at the mission. We still ended up taking out the Moff, so that was good. So yeah, he was an interesting character, a bit more convoluted. Certainly, most outlaws I've ever seen played, and there's been a couple of them because they're attractive. High dexterity, good combat skills. Start out with a solid 5D base weapon, so the heavy blaster pistol does as much damage as a blaster rifle, but it's smaller and quasi-legal. Yeah, he was a very interesting character to play. One of my darkest characters. I usually never really played dark characters, but he was. Oh, he was. He earned those dark side points. Finally, I'd like to show you my very, very first Star Wars The Role-Playing Game character. This I keep around because I keep all of my characters around, but more importantly, I keep him around because he is an example of what I try to avoid when I start a new game. The character's name is Slavenese Kran, which I think was inspired from a book I was reading back at the time, written by J.H. Brennan. I think he had a character named something like Stavanese or something, but Slavenese Kran was obscure enough that nobody else caught a reference, if there even was one. I can't remember. But he was a human pirate, and the problem was the Game Master didn't really know the rules very well. So I came into the game and wanted to know about how to make the character clearly. And he's like, well, you take 7 dice and you distribute them among the various skills. So I had my base attributes, and pirates are pretty solid. And as I was going through, I looked and I'm like, well, can I improve the attributes themselves? And he said, sure. And I said, if the attributes tell what the skills are, all the skills underneath them are the same level as that attribute? He said, yes. I'm like, well, well, darn, why would I ever want to do anything other than increase the attributes, because that'll increase a bunch of skills for the same point. That's not how it works. You don't increase the attributes. The attributes are your baseline. And you increase the skills showing what your character is good at. This character did not. So this character is thoroughly broken and disgusting. We didn't know any better. So this is the character as it stands. Because again, the guy did not know the rules. And I didn't know the rules either. This is the first I'd ever played the game. So, dexterity of 5 dice. So faster even than most races that are built for speed and dexterity. Perception of 2 dice. Knowledge of 1 die plus 2. I don't know how I got that. But he's pretty dumb. But that's okay, because he has a mechanical trait of 4 dice. Which is, again, hero maximum for human. Technical of 6 dice. Which is, again, pretty dumb, because I never used any of those skills. I just was going... This wasn't tactically done this way. Strength of 6 dice, stronger than a Wookiee. Perception of just 2 dice. So, yeah, Blaster of 7D plus 2, skill. Starship Gunnery of 7 dice. Demolition, Droid Programming, Repair, Medicine. All 7 dice or better. So, thoroughly broken. And... personality looks out for number 1, himself, looks down on weaklings, respects authority when it suits him. He had no force skills, so that's at least good. Equipment. Oh god. This is... Oh, connection with other characters. It's his first mission. Yeah. Final equipment. And this is another example of a horrible trend to start with if your first game. Heavy blaster pistol. No. Not heavy blaster pistol. Heavy blaster, like repeating blaster. We didn't know those were things that you would mount on turrets. So 8 die damage. Yeah, I want that. I had a heavy repeating blaster. A scimitar. 50 thermal detonators. Again, no idea on scope or size or anything like that. A person can't carry 50 thermal detonators. Although if you have a 6 die strength, maybe you could. But we just looked at the damage codes and, oh god, why wouldn't you want one? They do so much damage. Pass to a rebel-provided ship. Sure, that's a thing you could have. Vibroblade, because vibroblades are cool. Dexterity enhancing armor adds +2 to strength. Doesn't give a penalty to all the dodgings and skills that, you know, the better armors do. So, and protects better than Stormtrooper armor, which is some of the better in the game. Underwater suit, movement jacket. Oh, with a movement packet, like thrusters that would help you underwater. We needed it for the mission. 2 medium repeating blasters, so those are my sidearms. Again, they're the size of large machine guns. We didn't know that. The book wasn't very clear on that with the original edition. And even then, it didn't really get all that terribly clear until they started classifying the heavy repeating blaster as the E-Web blaster that should be most commonly found among Imperial units. And when you saw one deployed on... I think there was an E-Web in the Hoth battle in The Empire Strikes Back. So, yeah, then we knew that the heavy repeaters are a bit too big. But by this game, we didn't know that, so... 4 lightsabers. Oh, yeah, we had those like candy. They were our favorite door openers. Everybody had a brace of them. Why wouldn't you? 5 die damage... background. Since youth, had indifference to Empire and Rebellion, trained to be pirate, using the war as an excuse. So, of course, the exact person that you would want in your Rebel team is a guy who doesn't really care about the Rebels all that much. Quote, screw anyone, your enemies, your friends, your own mother. So nice. So, this is a a horrible character. I'm not proud of it, but it is useful, I think, to go back and look at some of these things as an example of what not to do. And since it came out of me, I realized that, you know, in 10th grade in high school, this was the cool character I wanted to make. He's edgy, he's got tons of stuff, he's physically superior to everybody. Yeah, there were some problems in that. And we only played one session. Don't think that this went on and on and on and on. And yes, that means in one session I got 4 lightsabers, all these repeating blasters. Yeah, I think we ended up with a couple of X-Wings too. I don't have that written down, but I think on our mothership I had 2 X-Wings. I don't know. Just another example of what can happen if you don't know what you're doing. And while he was my very first character, I don't really consider him as my first character because it wasn't a real game of Star Wars. It didn't have a whole lot that made it feel like Star Wars, outside of the fact that we're fighting stormtroopers and the like. This was the first character that made me feel like I was playing in Star Wars. This, another hand-drawn-out character. This was Cray Brom. Cray was a mercenary, and a mercenary was another attractive character template for Star Wars, because you start out with really good combat stats, and you start out with really good combat gear. Right up there with a bounty hunter. And again, pencil tends to fade a little bit, so some of this is a bit hard to read. I don't think I increased any of his base statistics, so he was pretty solid. Perception was the only real weakness. His knowledge was a little soft, but otherwise the other stats were above average. He ended up with very high blaster skills, as you might imagine, and decent dodging. But this was a character that was part of a dedicated campaign. We had a ship. We went around and we went from mission to mission to mission to mission, doing things for the rebellion against the Empire, because that's how the original game was. This is before the prequels. This was before any but some of the earliest of the expanded universe. So that was our benchmarks that we were shooting for, at least as far as we were aware. I mean, obviously there were a number of novels that were out. Unit uniform, that's from the Merc background. Heavy blaster pistol, oh yes. A force pike, I had one of those. I didn't really understand how big those things were, so it was something I kept on my belt, and I just like it shoots out a force length beam. No, didn't do that. Comlink, backpack, blaster packs. I had run out of thermal detonators, so you can tell how much we like to use those things. Med packs. I had a sniper rifle. It was a very fancy sniper rifle. We got that from Imperial R&D. It worked really well. Armor. We were all about getting Imperial armor and customizing it, because that was the basis that we had. We really didn't have a lot of the expanded universe outside of Boba Fett having his own custom armor. And having custom armor was cool, because we knew there was stuff he could do. The missile backpack, the jetpack, the all the different weapons and gadgets he had. We wanted that kind of stuff. So of course the first thing we did, we beat a couple of scout troopers with their lower profile armor, and we modified it to the point where we could pass as not having looted it off the bodies of scout troopers. But it had all kinds of fun stuff. Camouflage, protective helmet with macro binoculars, 180-degree scan, mini computer, breathing apparatus, mapping computer. It had a turbo projected grappling hook with flexus steel lanyard, the height of cool. Whoosh, yoink. Yep. Had a couple of force points. Not a great deal of numbers on this, to be honest. But this also kind of outlined, even back then, with these kind of skill points based games, a lot of times I did the kind of thing that I really not so fond of these days. I had goals in mind. I had a build that I had decided on, and so I thought to budget all the character points that I would get on what to pad out my character with. So I was trying to get up to... what was the first thing? Was to get a command of 6 die. That would have been pretty good, but Cray was kind of the leader of the group, so he wanted to be able to command other people. We had a ship, and I wanted to be the captain of the ship. That would have taken 36 character points, a lot of playing sessions. We had number 2, Con of 5 dice. That would have taken 21 character points to get that far. Multiple bumps to get up. Hide of 4 dice, because we weren't always the stealthiest. That would have been 9 points. Starship Shields up to 6 dice, because in our ship, I was actually the person delegated. We had a pilot already, so I wasn't doing that, and I wasn't the best with the guns, but I could do the shields pretty well. That was the lot that I selected. So I had to get up to 6 dice in that, which would have helped us out. Technology of 4 dice, so that's kind of how I laid out my character. Cray is still one that I have warm feelings about, although at this point, I started playing him back in high school. No, it wasn't high school. Back in my college days, we had switched early on in my freshman year in college. My friend Vince and I, we pulled out these characters and started playing a little bit before we had a lot of other people around us, and told some pretty good stories back then, and eventually kind of expanded out. We got our ship right away, and we did again some fairly not very memorable adventures. But, again, it was time spent with my friends, and I remember spending with Vince and having a good time with it. I think he was playing his character, Erickson Flask, who was the pilot, took care of the piloting and shooting. And, it was a good time. Warmly remember that character. So, those were some of my earliest characters in the Star Wars, the role-playing game. Later on, we would eventually find other versions of Star Wars to play, and we would move on to a lot of other games. Like I said, I don't have a lot of characters for that game, but the ones that I do have to say, I do love the Star Wars universe, not from an unthinking fanboy level, but just I appreciate and respect what it did, and I have very good memories of the times that we spent with that game. And, time spent watching it with my friends, all the different versions. So, a good thing to remember on a time when I'm maybe not feeling quite so great, maybe not able to have the bombastic videos that I would like to have, but I think this was a pretty good stretch, so another good COVID file banked, and hopefully you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed reliving some of those memories. Of course, just to give you some context here, these are all of the character sheets that I've had for Star Wars games. Not a huge, thick sheaf of papers, but respectable for the forever game master that I usually am. But if I showed you all the ones that I have for Dungeons & Dragons, that's more than one of those boxes will fit. And the sad thing is, for my favorite role-playing game that I haven't made, GURPS, I don't think I have any characters that I've ever made and played. All the characters that I have are NPCs, ones that I've made, loving the creation system, but just never having any that are actually tested in gameplay. So, that's how it goes. But at any rate, thanks for joining me. I'm Rob, and until next time, when I slouch in front of one of these videos in front of the camera for you, farewell.